Once, as the sun beat from its high home, yonder the tiny, the one who ran ahead, came over the hill to tell what was seen. Amidst a vast plain his eyes had met a monument of a bird, whose eyes and beak were opened in flame. When his brothers and sisters crested the hill, they too saw its glory. But they were afraid, for no elven settlement could be seen to the horizon. The men looked out over the boreal plains of Whiterun Hold. Its sparse tundra and level terrain allowed the naked eye to see for leagues to the distant snowy peaks. The ground was painted golden green, veined with crystal blue rivers, flowing languidly from Eastmarch to the Reach. Ysgramor's companions were awestruck by it. Is not this wide land fit for harvest? Why haven't the elves, vile to their core, seen to exploit and tame it? And that grand stone structure of avian elegance, surely whoever carved such a magnificent monolith wouldn't abandon it. They asked of their elven captives, for they had many, what they found unfit about these plains. Yet even the captives who still bore their tongues could say nothing of the valley. They looked with fear at the winged colossus, and from their babblings did the warriors of Jorvaska learn that it was older than even the elves themselves. Of those who wrought it solid from its mother stone, nothing could be said, but it was known to drive a magic almost as old as Nirn itself, some remnants of the gods' efforts to render a paradise in Mundus before the shattering of Lorkhan. If there's one thing a Nord loves more than juniper-infused mead and blonde beauties, it's good steel. Be it a sword or axe or mace, good sturdy metal, forged by a master smith, is worth a mammoth's weight in gold. And every Nord from Riften to Solitude will tell stories about Skyforge steel. Many would claim to have held one, finding it amongst the death and detritus of the battlefield, or in some ancient untouched tomb, lost by a previous adventurer turned resident. Most of these tales would be fibs, as there is only one man living today who holds the secrets to forging Skyforged weapons. His name is Yorland Greymane, and he says Skyforged steel is his art and honour. His clan fathers have worked it since the first Greymanes came to Whiterun. True as this may be, the Skyforge has been a source of wonder to mortals for as long as they've roamed the world. And before then, it was the gods who tempered their weapons in its fires. When the 500 companions of Ysgramor found the forge, they made their home beside it, capsizing their longship on the hillside. But we're not here just to talk about the significance of the Skyforge. Even a blind man could attest to its majesty. There is in fact another forge, so close by that it can be seen from the Stonebird's eye. And it is this forge that piques my curiosity. By name alone you'd think it's the Skyforge's adversary, its equal opposite. Yet no one speaks of this forge. It is forgotten to the ages, and not a soul in Skyrim could tell you of its origins. This is the Lunar Forge, and it looks like, well, it looks like any old forge you'd find in any old town. When I tell you what makes it unique to a regular forge, you'll be wholeheartedly underwhelmed. But don't be put off by that, because I believe there's a long-lost secret to this overlooked location, a secret that has been buried by time, and by a history that was written by the enemies of those who used the forge. All of this will make sense soon enough, I promise. My name is Drew, welcome back to FudgeMuppet, and let's get into the video. Before we wade through the many obscure and contradictory accounts of ancient history, to that dawn era when mortals didn't exist to document it, we best start by talking about what exactly we know about the Lunar Forge, and what makes Lunar Forged weapons so special. And this is the disappointing part, where Skyrim's mechanics and design choices really try to sap the magic from the land's distinctive locations and items. Upon discovering Silent Moon's camp, and dispatching of some random bandits, you'll notice a typical looking forge. You wouldn't know it was anything but a typical forge, if not for the crudely scrawled notebook resting on the workbench. There are also a couple of so-called lunar weapons lying around. According to their enchantments, they will burn targets, though only while the moons are out. The book, written by an anonymous traveller, reads as follows. I've managed to get the forge itself up and running, but again, I find nothing special about its workings. These weapons were clearly forged here, yet the secret of their enchantment remains elusive. All I've been able to discern so far is some connection between the weapon's power and the appearance of the moons. The weapons themselves are crafted of what seems to be normal metal, but while the moons are high above, they gain an additional ability. It seems that once the sun has gone down, the lunar weapons take on a vampire-like ability, transferring a small amount of health from the victim to the user. These notes don't offer a great deal of insight, but what's most peculiar about them is the mention of a vampire-like enchantment. I understand that when some people think of the moons, they think of vampires, but how can you mistake absorbing vitality with burning? I can't think of a logical connection, and I can't conjure up a good reason for lunar weapons to change their properties. All in all, everything about the Lunar Forge and its creations feels rushed from a development development perspective. Maybe there were plans to properly include so-called lunar weapons in the Elder Scrolls V. Perhaps they were forgotten about, but there are countless issues with them. Firstly, the Forge is no different to any other, and even if you wait for the moons to align in the sky above and drench the Forge in twilight, you can't actually craft lunar weapons. You can disenchant the existing lunar weapons to reuse the rather lackluster effects at the enchanting table, but beyond some vampire role-playing potential, why would you even want the enchantment? It's not particularly powerful when there's an abundance of weapons with the regular burning effect. If we were here to talk about the power of lunar weapons from a gameplay perspective, then we could pretty much end the video right here. There's not much left to know. But here we are, and here I am still talking. That's because I think there's more to the Lunar Forge than we got in the game. I think there is a lore-based reason for the inclusion of the Lunar Forge in Skyrim, even if it was never fleshed out. Granted, everything from here is speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. But I believe this forge is just as significant as the legendary Skyforge in Whiterun, only the Lunar Forge was on the wrong side of history. The creation story of the universe is subject to a great deal of variation. Cultures spin their own unique stories, interpreting details with mortal biases, embellishing to make their own heroes more gallant, and their own races more esteemed. The forces of creation are inherently alien, and transcend mortal experiences and values. But even with all of these divergences, the bones of the creation story remain consistent. We have the dichotomy of stasis and change, of order and chaos, and these forces are typically known as Anu and Padamai. To continue the story, I'll be taking elements from both the monomyth and the Anuad. Essentially, these two forces, or brothers for lack of a better term, came into the void and time began. Their interplay led to the creation of Ner, the mother of the universe. She was beautiful, the inspiration for the very concept of beauty, and she loved Anu. They fornicated, and Ner gave birth to the 12 worlds of creation before dying from the immensity of the labour. Padamai, envious of his sibling and his sibling's lover, hated the worlds. He saw in them Anu's everything, and Ner's delightful appearance, and resented them. So he swung his sword and shattered the worlds. Anu and Padamai fought amongst the cosmic rubble. Anu was victorious, and cast aside the corpse of his brother. Only he was not truly dead. While Anu attempted to save creation by forming the remnants of the 12 worlds into one, Padamai struck him through the chest with one last blow. Anu grappled with his brother, and pulled them both outside of time forever. One of these 12 worlds was the world belonging to the Elhnofey. The Elhnofey are the ancestors to the races of men and Mer, and they were the only survivors of the 12 worlds along with the Hist trees. After the destruction wrought by Padamai, and the creation of the single conglomerated world called Nirn, a large fragment of the Elhnofey world landed on Nirn relatively intact, and the Elhnofey living there were the ancestors of the Mer. These Elhnofey who remained in their own land are called the Old Elhnofey. These Elhnofey fortified their borders from the chaos outside, hid their pocket of calm, and attempted to live on as before. But not all of the Elhnofey landed on Nirn in the fragment of their native homeland. Other Elhnofey arrived on Nirn scattered amid the confused jumble of the shattered worlds, wandering and finding each other over the years. These were the ancestors of men. Eventually, the wandering Elhnofey found the hidden land of Old Elhnofey, and were amazed and joyful to find their kin living amid the splendor of ages past. The wandering Elhnofey expected to be welcomed into the peaceful realm, but the Old Elhnofey looked on them as degenerates, fallen from their former glory. This distinction between the old and wandering Elhnofey would shape the evolution of Nirn's races. This rift is why we have such a prominent distinction between what it is to be a man or Mer. This set the course for an eternity of bad blood. Ognifir of the Sigic Order puts it best. He says, "In Mundus, conflict and disparity are what bring change, and change is the most sacred of the 11 forces. Change is the force without focus or origin. Simply put, the schism in the human Aldmeri worldview is the mortal's relationship to the divine. Humans take the humble path that they were created by the immortal forces, while the Aldmer claim descent from them. It doesn't seem like much, but it's a distinction that colours the rest of their diverging mythologies. So when the Old Elhnofey denied their own kin, the Wanderers, from access to their native land, war seemed as inevitable as the passage of time. They were an even match. The Old Elhnofey retained their ancient power and knowledge, but the Wanderers were more numerous, and toughened by their long struggle to survive on Nirn. This war reshaped the fate face of Nirn, sinking much of the land beneath new oceans, and leaving the lands as we know them, Tamriel, Akavir, Atmora, and Yakuda. The old Elhnofey realm, although ruined, became Tamriel. The remnants of the Wanderers were left divided on the other 3 continents. Depending on how you interpret the sources, you could say that old Elhnofey was actually the lost continent of Aldmeris, and Tamriel was but the battleground. But the war supposedly terraformed the land, creating new oceans and continents, and this is the Dawn Era, so it's hard to comment on geography at this time. And there's also the notion that Aldmeris never physically existed, and was but a memory of the old Elhnofey's shared values and culture. This is supported by the idea that the fracturing of the Aldmer into the many races of Mer we have now is referred to as the Sundering of Aldmeris. But if you want to hear more about that digression, I've just this second decided I'll cover it in its own video, so stay tuned for that. Whatever the case, my point is, it's incredibly difficult to comment accurately on the semantics of the Dawn Times. So how does this all tie in to the Lunar Forge and the Skyforge? Well, the Skyforge is believed to have existed long before the emergence of mortals on Tamriel, but then a new question arises. When in the Dawn Era would the gods need a forge, in the middle of this otherwise empty expanse? And the answer to that is the Elhnofey Wars. Lorkhan, the trickster god, devised the plan to create the mortal realm, a place riddled with limitations. At first, the other Aedra, like Auriel and Magnus, liked Lorkhan's idea, but when they learned they would have to sacrifice a great deal of their power in the construction of it, they were outraged. Magnus and his people fled back to Aetherius, but most of them had overcommitted and were forced to come to terms with their enfeebled selves. Auriel, the king of the elves, was disgusted by Lorkhan's perceived betrayal, and he led his armies of elves, or Old Elhnofey, against the trickster. To meet the challenge, Lorkhan assembled a legion of men, or at this time the Wandering Elhnofey. As I mentioned earlier, these wars would lead to the transformation of Nirn's topography. This, combined with the fact the wars occurred in ancient times, means we can't exactly plot out where the battles took place, or give detailed events of specific skirmishes. But the monomyth, in all its enigmatic glory, does shed some light on what went down. Of course, the section of the book that elaborates on the Elhnofey Wars comes specifically from the Altmeri creation story, so there's a dense layer of bias to sift through. The men gained an advantage in the war, and Lorkhan's forces took the upper hand in the north. Auriel could not save Altmora, the Elder would, and it was lost to men. The monomyth calls it Altmora instead of Atmora, which is interesting. Could it be that the men who won this battle and claimed the continent of Atmora removed the L because of its clear connection with the word Altmer? Or was it the Altmer creation story that misnamed Atmora? Whatever the case, the monomyth goes on to say, they were chased south and east to Old Elhnofey, and Lorkhan was close behind. We mentioned earlier that Old Elhnofey is the name sometimes attributed to the lost continent of Aldmeris, but also to the land of Dawn's beauty Tamriel. In the context of this story, it is almost certainly Tamriel. Tamriel lies to the south of Atmora, and I think it would be reasonable to assume that the next clash between the old and wandering Elhnofey would likely take place in the land we now call Skyrim. So the Elhnofey Wars came to Skyrim, and we have the Skyforge, a relic of the Dawn Times, an ancient forge that makes steel hold tighter. The forge is tactically located atop a hill, before the vast Whiterun plain. It almost seems like the perfect stage for a major battle. Now we have to take a moment to look at the location of the Lunar Forge. This mysterious structure is a stone's throw from Whiterun and the Skyforge. Of course, looking at the in-game map, you'd expect the Lunar Forge to be on the opposite side of the hold maybe, but we always have to take the in-game geography with a grain of salt. The scale of the regions in the lore is considerably larger than in-game. Things are downscaled for practical purposes. I think the Lunar Forge was the wandering Elhnofey equivalent to the Skyforge. The parallels are too stark to ignore. Auriel is commonly depicted as a bird of prey, and the Skyforge looks almost like a shrine in his honor. The Lunar Forge, it's bare and unadorned, but I think there's a reason for that, which I'll explain in a moment. But Lorkhan is closely tied to the moons, and there is even a theory that Massa and Secunda are the missing god's flesh divinity, his cloven duality. Whether this supposed battle in the region we now know as Whiterun Hold was the last of the Elhnofey Wars is unclear, but when the wars came to an end, Trinomac, Auriel's greatest knight, knocked Lorkhan down in front of his army and reached in with more than hands to take his heart. He was undone. The men dragged Lorkhan's body away and swore blood vengeance on the heirs of Auriel for all time. The Wanderers lost, and the old Elhnofey were victorious. I think it's a fitting theory, and a poetic one, to speculate that the Skyforge is a monument to their victory over men, while the Lunar Forge was doomed to fade into obscurity, overshadowed by history's champions. Maybe the Lunar Forge once looked as grandiose as the Skyforge, only it was desecrated by the old Elhnofey, who were drunk on their triumph. Whatever monument may have stood there was torn asunder, like Lorkhan's chest atop the adamantine tower. Of course, this is all speculation. All we truly have on the Lunar Forge is an underwhelming little smithy, nestled in an ancient Nordic ruin. It could be a coincidence that it exists so close to the Skyforge, but that's boring, and it's not why we love the Elder Scrolls. When I explore these worlds for the 10,000th time, it's the rich lore and history that keeps me coming back. It's the fact that every location feels meaningful. What do you think? Is the Lunar Forge a forgotten relic of ancient times? Or is it just another forge with the power to create weapons with mundane enchantments? Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this speculative video. I've been Drew, this has been FudgeMuppet, and I'll see you next time.